Perfect. Hello, everyone. Like I said, my name is Tim Hayes, and I'm a state policy manager for Conservation Voters of PA. We really appreciate you being here to attend our 2024 post-election webinar. First, we're going to be discussing the results of the election and for each race, from the Senate and congressional races to the state row officers and the state legislature. We'll also discuss the work that we did to promote and protect democracy and elect pro-environmental candidates to the state legislature, one of whom we'll be hearing from via pre-recorded video tonight. And we'll also discuss what these election results mean for the state legislature going into the new legislative session in 2025. So before we get into the election results, first I'm going to turn it over to Molly Parzan, who is the Executive Director of Conservation Voters of Pennsylvania, to give a little bit more of an introduction. So yeah, Molly, you can take it away.
Thank you so much, Tim. Good evening, everyone. I am so excited to be here with you tonight to talk about these election results. And I know excited might be a strange word to use in the moment that we're in, about 2 weeks out of what in many ways is going to go down as a devastating electoral cycle for the issues that we care about on this call for the protection of our environment and our democracy. I don't need to tell any of you on this call that we suffered some very serious blows at the federal level, with all three branches of the federal government now in anti-environment hands and staring down the barrel of a second Trump administration. I know that you all, as I do, remember viscerally the feeling we had in 2016, and in the 4 years following that, of waking up and checking your phone in the morning and seeing the latest and worst news out of the federal government. And I know that I've taken some time, my staff has taken some time these last few weeks to sit with those results and to start thinking about how we as an organization, how we as individuals, and how we as a movement can meet this moment and move through it with activism and advocacy, how we can still accomplish the things that we know we need to do to meet our climate goals, to protect our environment, to conserve our air, land, and water, and how we can be there for each other. This is a really challenging moment, and we know it's going to be even more challenging for people with marginalized identities. And so it is so important that as a movement, we are standing together, we're standing strong, we're standing in allyship with others who are struggling in this moment as well. All of that being said, I'm in a unique position tonight, and we're all in a unique position in that we can recognize the gravity of this moment and also recognize that here in Pennsylvania, we actually had some really extraordinary wins that I'm excited to share with you tonight. And so that's where the excited piece comes in, because like many of you, I was looking for bright spots after election day. And I am so gratified and proud that one of those bright spots is here in Pennsylvania, thanks to the work that all of the staff has done, volunteers across the state, and each of you that are here on this call. You've made Pennsylvania and our elections here, while it may not seem that way, one of the few bright spots across the country in an otherwise very challenging election. And so I'm excited to dig in on that, to celebrate the wins we can celebrate, and to talk about what it means moving forward in Harrisburg. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Katie Bloom. Katie is the Political and Legislative Director here at Conservation Voters of Pennsylvania, and she is going to talk us through what are the results, what actually happened on Election Day in the state of Pennsylvania. Katie?
Thank you, Molly. And we can start the slides. All right. Okay, so there were a lot of results, and a lot of people have been reading a lot of news and things like that, but I'm going to give a very quick overview with a couple points of meaning rolled in for all of you. If we could go to the federal slide, the next one, please. All right. So here's the federal level update. This is how Pennsylvania, that map shows how Pennsylvania voted for Trump versus Harris. Many of you may be seeing a lot of news right now about Senator Casey. And the one thing that I will say is that it is a close enough race that an automatic recount has been triggered. There's a lot of news coming in from various sources right now about that. Oh, can Casey overcome this, etc. But I just want to say Casey's not looking at conceding until this recount's done and we go through the already established election process here in Pennsylvania. So we do have an automatic recount for Senator Casey. Sadly, we lost two members of Congress. Who were really good environmental champions for our partners at National League of Conservation Voters, Representative Wild and Representative Cartwright. That is Lehigh Valley and Northeastern Pennsylvania. And right now, as I mentioned, Senator Casey, we have that race is still not officially called. So again, currently, it is 52 to 47 with one race left to call. And there's actually congressional districts that have not been called yet, too. And I just checked this about 2 hours ago. As you can see there on the screen, it is a Republican House majority in DC, 218 to 212. But there are still 5 races left to call there. So that means, much like the previous 2 years, we are going to have an incredibly tight federal government in both chambers. And it's going to mean a lot of advocacy. And I know folks see a lot of anti-environment wins in some of these federal races, but as Molly said, there are still some bright spots, and I wanted to lift some of that up for folks. Our friends in North Carolina, at the state level, they had a slew of state level races with pro-environment candidates. We also know Ruben Gallego in Arizona it has won that congressional seat. But other interesting things that we saw across the country, even though we got election results that not everybody was hoping for, I want to lift up things like Louisiana, Rhode Island, Minnesota, California. I'm going to say Louisiana again, not known as a pro-environment state. However, they all passed various ballot measures to help protect the environment at the state level with some pretty overwhelming support. So even though we are disappointed about some things, there are definitely some bright spots. We can go to the next slide, please. I think we have the line fixed. Thank you all for being patient with us. Just very quickly, I want to touch on the state row offices. Just if people had not really been following that, I know federal races have taken over the news cycle. Incumbent Treasurer Stacey Garrity won re-election. Incumbent Auditor General Tim DeFore won re-election. The Attorney General seat was an open seat between Democrat Eugene DePasquale and Republican Dave Sunday. And Dave Sunday was able to win that seat. And what's really fascinating about some of this is it's all pretty much at the same percentages there, that 51 to 46%. It's actually pretty fascinating to see, and we'll talk about this a little bit later. Next slide. All right, the state Senate. This is where we start having a little bit of state excitement. We have the same number of legislators in the Senate. There was a hope that maybe we could get some more seats to maybe have a 50-50 pro-environment Senate, but we knew statistically that was going to be an incredibly heavy lift. So I just put there on the slide for you, State Rep Pisciatano held on to the now retired Senator Brewster seat. In Philadelphia, we now have Senator Picozzi, who beat Senator Dillon. And there was an open Senate seat in the Harrisburg area with Senator DeSanto, and State Representative Patty Kim, a longtime friend of conservation voters, successfully won that seat. And one cool thing I want to lift up about that is Senator-elect Kim is the first woman AAPI senator in Pennsylvania, and that's pretty cool. Next slide, please. All right. State House. This is where it gets really exciting. We saw all of these national trends happening. And, we saw fellow battleground states, lose slim majorities or come even. Other, more manufacturing states like Michigan and places like that. But what Pennsylvania did, not only did we keep the same numbers in the state Senate, but we kept the same numbers in the Pennsylvania House, which means we have a pro-environment majority in the House, which is amazing. If people remember, 2019 and 2021, there was a lot of defense. And frankly, in 2020, there was a lot of talk about having constitutional amendments pass the legislature that didn't need a governor's signature to do things like ban our participation in RGGI, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. So this one seat majority is incredibly critical. So we're very excited because we can make sure that bad things do not happen as we have for the last 2 years. And we can keep making progress, just like we made progress over the last 2 years on a couple other pieces of legislation. I do want to lift up, there's some unique things here, and we're probably going to be calling you over the course of the next 2 years because we have 20 new members of the State House. Since 2022, we have about 70 new members of the State House. So we have a lot of education and advocacy to continue doing this, to continue to push our legislature to be truly a bipartisan pro-environment legislature. And I just want to lift up, we also found out last week, before I move on, that House and Senate leadership haven't really changed that much. There's been a few changes here and there with some switching of positions. So we're really looking forward to some established relationships and such going forward, trying to move environmental legislation and pro-democracy legislation through the state legislature. Next slide, please. All right. So what do all of these mean? Well, we know throughout polling and things like that from the work that we do that the electorate was definitely more Republican in Pennsylvania than previous years, and more male. And some of that was due to some very intentional and increased Republican voter registration in the state. And voters also made their decisions early. I think Molly can double check my number here, but I want to say it was about 65% of people had made their decisions in general before they even got their mail-in ballots pretty early. And a lot of people were really locked in on their federal level choices before President Biden dropped out and Vice President Harris took up the mantle. Additionally, those late breaking voters decided to vote for Trump in significant margins. And you can see some numbers here on the slides. But abortion was one of the top issues for voters. But it was overtaken by issues that Republicans have fared better on, including the economy, inflation, and immigration. And the Trump campaign spent significant money making sure that people cared more about those issues than others. But as we talked about, actually some random bright spots, the really cool fact that we kept our numbers in the state legislature going against trends. I want us to talk and hear a little bit about the work that we're doing. So for Conservation Voters of Pennsylvania, there was a lot of work we did on the ground, and I'm going to pass it back to Molly and our Director of Civic Engagement, Jess, to talk more about that.
Thank you so much, Katie. So What did our electoral program look like this year? My name is Molly Parson. I introduced myself earlier, and like I said, I am excited to be here to talk about the work that conservation voters of Pennsylvania did this year to elect pro-environment candidates. First, a quick disclaimer. While CVPA and Penn Future work hand in hand on a number of our programs, I want to be clear that our electoral work, CVPA's electoral work, is separate and conducted through our political action committees. CVPA's #1 goal this year, as Katie mentioned, was to preserve our crucial one-vote pro-environment majority in the State House. And as Katie detailed, I'm so pleased to say that we were able to do that. In order to get here, though, we asked our incredible donors, our volunteers, our activists, our staff to dig deep with their time and resources. And we ran an impressive $2.1 million program focused solely on state and down ballot races. This 2024 program included paid work like large-scale door knocking programs. It included our civic engagement team, some of whose beautiful faces you see here in these pictures, partnering with candidates to knock on doors with them and carry their message, and an incredible team of over 60 volunteers helping us with this work. This was one of our largest investments ever, and it really paid off. Slide 2, please. We'll go over some of how we did that, some of the tactics we used, and talk a little bit about that work in depth. But I first wanted to draw attention to this quote from the Inquirer about our work last week. We were featured in this article talking about the historic levels of spending that happened in this election this cycle that ended up in securing that one vote pro-environment majority. I don't need to tell you, because I'm sure you've seen the headlines, that campaigns are getting more and more expensive. And sometimes it's challenging for interest groups like ours to keep up and to make sure that our members and the issues that our members care about have a voice, when so often our spending can be dwarfed by spending from labor, from fossil fuel interests. And so I'm actually really proud and wanted to draw attention to this quote about how we ran some of the largest program this year, which was not true of the environment in past years. I've been at Conservation Voters of Pennsylvania for almost 13 years now, actually over 13 years now. And when I first started, we were spending hundreds of dollars, maybe low thousands of dollars on elections. And that was reflected in how the candidates that we worked with and the candidates that won their elections were talking about our issues. The fact is that they weren't. Through the work that CVPA has done year over year in state elections, we've really elevated the environment as an issue that deserves to be up there on the forefront of voters' minds, and deserves to be talked about by candidates who are running for office, among many other important issues. And so I'm really so pleased at how all of us collectively together on this call, the people who care about this work, have been able to elevate our issues over the years. Next slide, please. So before I talk about a couple of these individual tactics, because I know there's a lot of information and numbers on this screen, I want to talk about the importance of layering our work. We want to create a surround sound effect to make sure that our issues and our message can break through to voters. I am a Pennsylvania voter who watches TV and listens to the radio and is on the internet during election season. And I know you can all empathize with me when I say that it was a lot this year. There were a lot of political ads. I remember one day I was watching TV and it was a Trump ad followed by a Kamala ad, followed by a Trump ad, followed by a Harris ad. And it's really hard for organizations like ours and candidates like the ones we support at the state level to break through all of that noise and make their candidacy known and our issues known. And so what we tend to do is we like to layer our program. We don't want to do just one tactic in one place. We want to do as many tactics in as many places as possible, so that you are hearing about our issues, you're hearing about the environment and the candidates that support the environment on your TV and on your computer and at your doorfront and on your phone and via text. We want to annoy you a little bit, I'm not going to lie, to make sure that our message gets through. We also knew when planning this program that we had to be super targeted. We had to be talking to our voters about our issues. From our scripts on the doors to our digital ads, we made the environment a winning and compelling issue this cycle. All of these tactics that I'm going to dive. We weren't talking about abortion on the doors. We weren't talking about immigration. We were talking to voters who we knew our issues would resonate with, and we were talking about our issues. So what did we do? We knocked on a lot of doors first and foremost. We knocked on over 160,000 doors and had over 31,000 conversations with voters. We did this in a couple of strategic areas where there were some really crucial swing races. We were knocking on doors in the Lehigh Valley, in Bucks County, in Chester County, in northeastern Pennsylvania, and in Allegheny County. And so we really had an expanded footprint this election because there were critical races all across the state. We made a whole lot of phone calls. When we can't reach people on the doors, we want to try and reach them on the phones. It's pretty hard to get people to pick up their phones these days. And we know people get annoyed with them, but it's still important to have those conversations. And so by doing this, we had over 200,000 conversations with voters to ask them who they were voting for and to ask them to vote for our candidates. And this was our most expansive piece of our program. We did that for 14 state House and Senate candidates. This was especially important to supplement our work where our door program was smaller or where we had used one of these other tactics. We ran digital ads for 8 candidates across the state. They garnered over 21 million total impressions. That's a wonky digital word to say a lot of people watched these ads a lot of times. And we know that they broke through and we got some great feedback on them from candidates and from constituents in the districts. We ran a really cool program with texts. I know that we all got 1,000 texts this cycle from candidates. Hi, it's me, Kamala, looking for money again. But we ran a text program that was very targeted and that was responsive to what we were hearing on the ground. We were knocking on doors in a lot of suburban districts, and a lot of the voters we were looking for were younger voters. We knew it was so important to turn out younger voters this election, and that those voters were very likely to care about our issues because we all know that young people care about the environment, they care about climate change. But we were having a really hard time reaching these folks. And we realized pretty early on in our door knocking program that often we would be knocking on the door of a young voter who maybe was away at college, but still registered at their parents' house. Or they were out working their job and they were hard to reach on the doors despite, repeated knocks. Or we often actually encountered a, very progressive pro-environment young voter at a household, but whose parents were not, and they didn't want us to talk to their son or daughter. And so we realized that we needed to try and reach these voters another way, in addition to the digital ads and the phone calls they were getting. We decided that texts was going to be something we tried, and so we tried that to these young suburban voters that we were having a hard time reaching. So I think that really speaks to the very targeted, thoughtful, and strategic way that we went about this program that I think made it so effective. Next slide, please. I want to zoom in a little bit and look at a case study of how this work was actually impactful. What do all those numbers on the previous screen actually end up doing? And I want to talk about House District 144, a district where we spent significantly and where we won. This was what I like to call the swing district in the swing county. If there's anybody in the House from Bucks County, which I'm sure there are, I know that your county was really important this year. I was outdoor knocking there GOTV weekend, and it seems like everybody else was too. And I know that you all got a lot of knocks, a lot of calls, et cetera, but Bucks County was just that important. It is just swing district after swing district. House District 144 is home to Representative Brian Monroe. He was a vulnerable first-term incumbent. He had only won in 2022 by 515 votes, but in his first term in Harrisburg, he had a 100% pro-environment score. And so we knew that we had to protect this seat. If we were going to protect our precious one vote majority in the state house, we knew it was going to come down to seats like this where we had to defend these incumbents like Representative Monroe. So all 5 of the tactics on the previous screen that we talked about, door knocking, phones, texts, digital ads, direct contributions, All of those were deployed in Representative Monroe's district. All in all, we spent between $300,000 and $400,000 just in that district alone. And like I said, in 2022, we won by only 515 votes. In 2024, a much more challenging atmosphere. We more than doubled that margin in a very tough environment to just over 1,000 votes. Now, you may be sitting on this call saying, that's still not great. That's a lot of money per vote. And you know what? I agree with you. But if you look at that district and how much it voted for Trump and how much it voted for other anti-environment candidates, you look at the rest of the county and you look at the rest of the state. This is a bright spot and this is a win, and we invested the money it took to hold on to this seat. I want to show you a real quick video on the next slide, which is one of our digital ads that we ran for Representative Monroe. And then I'd love to show you a video from Representative Monroe himself thanking us for the work.
Moving towards clean energy isn't just an obligation, it's a moral duty. We have a responsibility to leave a better future for our children. As our state representative, Brian Monroe is committed to sustainable development. He brought in record funding to fix our infrastructure and prevent flooding. In Harrisburg, he's working to create clean energy jobs while holding big oil CEOs accountable, earning a 100% environmental score for his commitment to a cleaner future. November 5th, re-elect Brian Monroe.
Thank you, Tim. And this next video is just Brian Monroe thanking us for the work that we did this year.
Hello, conservation voters of PA. This is State Representative Brian Monroe here in the 144th District. Just wanted to say real quick how much I appreciate all of your hard work and efforts, along the thousands upon thousands of doors that we hit. Many times I ran into you guys in your green shirts, always was willing to stop and get a selfie. And just always appreciate everything that you guys do. This seat, the 144th seat, they threw everything at us in order to be able to flip this seat back to the wrong hands. And it was with your help that we were able to hold on to the seat. And with it, the one seat majority. And with that one seat Democratic majority in Pennsylvania, it's a critical shield here coming up over the next several years, specifically for the environment, green energy, renewable energy. And I just, like I said, I got to say how much I appreciate it. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you. Hello, conservation.
Thanks so much. Next slide, please. So last slide of me talking at you here. I just wanted to talk a little bit more about a kind of very different set of work that we also did this election that I'm really proud of. Outside of our work to elect specific candidates across the state that I just described, we also ran a massive voter registration program. We all know that voter registration is important. I believe our friends at New Pennsylvania Project said this on a webinar I was on last year, maybe, that the voter registration gap in Pennsylvania, the delta between voters who are eligible and people who are actually registered to vote is about 2 million people. That is a lot of people who are effectively disenfranchised right now because they are not registered to vote. And so we still have a lot of work to do to close that gap. And that gap is particularly prominent with what we call historically underrepresented communities. These are low-income folks, Black and brown voters. And so we ran a program this year that ended up registering a little bit over 14,000 new Pennsylvanians. We had 2 offices, one up in Bucks County, again, and one in Philadelphia. And many of these voters were first-time voters. Some folks who had just turned 18 were newly eligible. Some folks we encountered were changing their registration or their address. But we were happy to be able to meet folks where they were at in their communities and encourage them to make their voice heard and take that first step in the ladder of civic engagement to get involved in their community. After the registration deadline, when we could no longer register folks to vote, we sent our same voter registration teams out into the community again, asking folks to triple their vote, which means you ask someone on the street to ask 3 or 5 of their friends to vote as well. And this is just another tool in our toolbox that can help us broaden the electorate and bring more people into the democratic process, because we know that the more people that are involved in voting and voting their values values and voting for their community, the more pro-environment policies that we're going to have and the more environmental protection will be prioritized. And so really proud of this program as well, on top of our electoral work. Now I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to pass it to our incredible Director of Civic Engagement, Jess Catterat, who led our teams at both CVPA and Penn Future to ensure a free, fair, and functioning democracy in this crucial election year. Jess.
Thank you so much, Molly. I appreciate that and appreciate your rundown of all the great work CVPA did. I do want to talk about how critically important Molly just pointed out that in order to get the environmental legislation and regulations we really need a civically engaged population helping to elect a representative government. And so that's what all of this work I'm about to talk about is focused on. Really just making sure voters have what they need to cast their ballots and make their voices heard. And so we all need that in order to ensure our constitutional right to our environment is protected, right? The very first thing that starts with is voter education right off the bat. And so our teams across the board did so much work to ensure that you all, our members, our supporters, knew where to go, where to turn in their ballots. We held a webinar talking about voting for change and the power of your vote. We provided our community partners with digital toolkits where they could easily find content and language to guide their memberships and their supporters to cast their ballot and vote. And like I said, of course, making sure you all know where you're headed, when to go, how to get your ballot, especially in the somewhat new realm of voting by mail, like we have here in Pennsylvania. We engaged almost 200 volunteers, both in and out of state here in PA. And to boost the educational pieces of that, some of those volunteers submitted letters to the editor, which helps to reach thousands more than we could with our own contacts and social media and followings. And we saw some of those get published across the state in places like the Pocono Record, the Sentinel, the Lancaster Online paper. So we're really appreciative of the volunteers who used their power this fall to write and make sure the word got out there. And now let's talk a little bit about the other amazing work we're able to do alongside of our volunteers. Next slide, please. So there's a lot of facets to the democracy protection and election work we did together jointly this fall. And so first and foremost, every year, we sometimes forget, I think, that in order for the elections to happen twice a year, every year, it takes thousands of people just like you helping the polls to run smoothly, fairly, securely. And so we partnered with Power the Polls for the first time to ensure that we had poll workers at every poll across the state. And we were able to recruit 95 poll workers, focusing on regions where there was the highest need or the biggest gaps in covering polls. Again, poll workers are essential to keeping lines down, guiding voters to cast their ballot, and ensuring the process happens fairly and securely. And to further help voters cast their ballots, in mid-October, our call team worked together to make over 52,000 phone calls to vote-by-mail voters who are less likely to vote. The voters that maybe don't vote every single year or have requested to vote by mail before and not turned their ballot back in. And we were able to help make sure they knew about the specific rules around vote by mail and get that ballot in time to be counted. And that's a lot about the numbers, but on the next slide, I want to just take a moment to highlight some of the real impacts of that work. Big numbers can sound nice sometimes, but these are some of the experiences from some of our staff and volunteers. Speaking with a first-time voter who really wanted to vote by mail, so they tossed their ballot in the trash. And those of us here probably know that unfortunately that means you'd have to cast provisionally. So we were able to help them get the information they needed. We spoke with a voter who was unfortunately in the hospital and needed assistance in making sure that she got personalized assistance to cast her ballot. Folks whose ballots hadn't arrived yet, or people who were a little worried about the mail, and we were able to get them their information for local drop boxes. Of course, we're most excited about folks that also share our love for the environment and join us, and we're excited to work with us year round on environmental advocacy. But like I said, the goal of the program was to help vote by mail voters get that ballot in and counted. And on the next slide, we can talk a little bit more about another facet of the work we did. And so on the next slide, we're going to be talking about Penn Future's Get Out the Vote work. So Get Out the Vote, GOTV. I want to mention that this is a facet of Penn Future's work specifically because Penn Future is a partner group of the amazing partnership called Pennsylvania Voice. And this partnership is led primarily by groups of people of color focusing on building a representative democracy through civic engagement. And in coordination with that partnership, our team and our volunteers were able to fill gaps in outreach and calls made to BIPOC voters across the state that other of our amazing partner groups wouldn't have already had the coverage for. And we were able to call voters to remind them where to go in that critical week right before the election. In fact, we were able to expand our universe even further to more voters because volunteers, probably some of who are on this call with us today, helped out so much in those final days that we expanded not once, not twice, but 3 times. And together we were able to make 46,195 calls and 41,828 texts to Black voters, Indigenous voters, multiracial and ethnic voters, voters who we know experience higher aspects of voter suppression and environmental injustice and are historically disenfranchised in a number of ways. And that's why this aspect of the work is so critical. So I want to give a big shout out and thank you to every member of our civic engagement team, every colleague of ours that helped us. And I believe on the next slide, there's a couple of more aspects of what those numbers mean, right? The stories the impact we were able to have, even though some of the results I know from the election weren't how folks were hoping they would go, but we were able to help folks get to the right polling location. Someone who got excited to check in on their friends and family, spoke with a vote by mail voter whose ballot was torn, and now they knew exactly how to move forward with that, make sure they brought that ballot to the polling place. We were also able in those calls to provide, to give information to folks who needed rides to the polls, as well as specialized vote navigator assistance. So I'm really proud of the work that our team was able to do and achieve. And I know we laid it all out on the table this fall. Next, I'm going to pass it to Katie Bloom, our political and legislative director, to talk about the implications of the results of this election.
Yeah. I'm going to talk a little bit about 2 facets and then pass it to my colleague here in a little bit. So what are these federal policy implications? For awareness, conservation voters of Pennsylvania and Penn Future, the word Penn is in our name. Pennsylvania, we focus quite specifically on state level issues. However, we both have national organizations that we work with, like the League of Conservation Voters for CVPA, that do a lot of federal work. So what I have up here on the slide for you right now is a list, actually a picture, a graphic from the current White House showing all kinds of investments that the Biden-Harris administration has made in Pennsylvania, whether through discretionary funding or appropriations funding. And I want to lift up just a couple of really cool things that have happened in Pennsylvania. We have $19.3 billion in public investments in clean energy, infrastructure, and manufacturing. Several 100,000 applications to start new businesses, 560,000 new jobs. All of this is really, really amazing. And specifically, the Investing in America agenda that we have seen for the last several years has invested $4.3 billion in private sector manufacturing and clean energy investments. Some of you may have heard about the Turtle Creek facility for building battery manufacturing. Rebuild is investing $81 million in New Kensington, which is going to completely transform a brownfield site that was an aluminum plant. And there's a whole host of things, and we don't want to see any of that go away. What I can tell you is a significant portion, and over the last 60-ish days we have here of the Biden-Harris administration, anything that has been done through the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act, if they are under contract before January 20th, that is great. That's what we need. So the administration has a goal of getting as many contracts signed as possible to make sure we continue to implement as much of this transformative clean energy money out into the communities. And the other thing, you heard me speak earlier about how the Senate and the House are actually pretty close to get rid of certain legislation, to get rid of, really damage agency control of things. The Senate's still going to need a filibuster on some things. They're going to need 60 votes. The House is going to be really, really close. And to get things passed, not every party's member votes with their own party all of the time. So we really have an opportunity here to drive advocacy with so many projects across the country and Pennsylvania that have gone into more anti-environment districts, of getting those members of Congress to say, no, we like this money. The other thing that I want to give all of you an update on, it does appear that for things like the Farm Bill, the regular federal budget, we are going to be looking at a continuing resolution during this lame duck session that might take us into maybe March at the earliest, but we are going to be seeing a continuing resolution on that. The other thing that I will quickly lift up are federal regulations. I know a lot of folks out there are really worried about the EPA. We did see things in the first Trump administration, especially in terms of staff and budget cuts. We do expect things like that to go through. However, again, we have these amazing points of advocacy and a lot of rules that the current administration is enacting, has been enacting, that we will need to protect from what we call CRAs. That is where it's the Congressional Review Act. So we will be working with our national partners to mobilize folks to fight some of that. So that's where we are federally right now. I know that sounds optimistic, but it's going to be really hard. So I do want to flag for folks, it's going to be hard, but we've done this before and we can do this again. Next slide, please. What is the impact the row offices? It's going to be interesting. Tim DeFore and Stacey Garrity as auditor and treasurer have not had a lot of impact on our issues to date in their prior terms. I do want to flag that Stacey Garrity does oversee a lot of the Pennsylvania pension investments, etc. And there's money there invested in fossil fuel companies. And those are some points of advocacy that we could ultimately have. And obviously, Attorney General. I think folks remember when Governor Shapiro was Attorney General, he issued a report on fracking. The Attorney General can play a pretty significant role in our issues. Attorney General-elect Sunday did not seek our endorsement, so we don't have a great idea of where he feels he's going to land on some of our environmental issues. So we will have to wait and see and continue advocacy there as well. I'm going to kick it over to all of the state things. I've seen a couple things pop up in Q&A about how do we start advocating. So I'm going to kick it over to Penn Future's Director of Government Affairs, Adam Nagel, to talk about a whole bunch of things we're going to be looking at moving forward.
Thanks so much, Katie. Appreciate it. Yeah, so obviously, as Katie and others have talked about, there's not necessarily a lot of change in this from a state government perspective, and especially when we're talking about the General Assembly, things are pretty much status quo there for the most part. So with that being said, there was a lot that did not get done over the last 2 years with the current legislative session that is over. So looking ahead, here's what's out there. I'm going to reverse the list here a little bit, and then we'll see if I remember that I did that. So community solar. A couple of people asked about community solar in the chat. Obviously, I'm going to throw out bill numbers for some of these. I'm not going to throw out bill numbers for others. The current bill number that was moving this legislative session was House Bill 1842. That actually passed through the House. It was under discussion for further movement all the way really up until last week when session formally basically came to an end this year. Both Penn Future, Conservation Voters of PA were fighting hard to get it through to that point where it could be passed through the Senate and signed by Governor Shapiro. Disappointed it didn't happen, but it really came a lot further than it has previously. So we are feeling optimistic about community solar's chances come the next legislative session. We feel very good that we can at least continue to make headway and hopefully get that issue across the finish line, as we know it's been a long, hard fight for so many advocates, for so many concerned citizens when it comes to community solar. So we are looking forward to continuing that battle next year. So fingers crossed on that one. I'll go back up to the top now. Pennsylvania Energy Development Authority, that was another legislative initiative to modernize and make some changes to the Pennsylvania Energy Development Authority. Another one that passed through the House, but unfortunately did not gain further consideration in the Senate, but was part of many conversations over the course of the past, let's call it 6 months. So that is another one where we will be working hard to ensure that we can modernize and reform the PA Energy Development Authority come next year, hopefully to a good resolution. Chapter 14. Chapter 14 is part of the Public Utility Code. It was, in theory, supposed to be authorized before the year came to an end. So since it doesn't look like that's going to happen, it's going to sunset. What that means moving forward is really up to the General Assembly to decide what they want to do with that. I do have to give a lot of credit to legal aid advocates for Pennsylvania Utility Law Project, Community Legal Services, and others who've really been leading the charge on this one. Penn Future, Conservation Voters of PA, we have been really working to support their efforts, and we'll see what happens on Chapter 14 as it relates to that particular piece when session restarts in January. Transit funding, another important issue that has been left kind of off to the side until next year. So this is another one where there is a significant budget shortfall for transit across the Commonwealth, but most acutely for those in the southeastern Pennsylvania region with SEPTA. I believe SEPTA's budget shortfall coming into the next fiscal year is more than $200 million. So this was obviously part of a conversation around budget, part of a conversation in the fall. We are really looking, hard at the General Assembly and Governor Shapiro to come up with some sort of solution for that, so we can make sure that all of our transit agencies across the Commonwealth do not go over a fiscal cliff, especially for those of us who do live in the Southeast PA region. And then 35% by 2035 or more. So that has been a conversation for a really long time in Pennsylvania too, about updating our alternative energy portfolio standards. It's been a really long time since Pennsylvania has done that. We have been surpassed by our neighbors, by so many states across the country who have actually gone bolder and bigger when it comes to targeting the percentage of energy from renewable energy sources. Governor Shapiro has put out his plan for that. Pennsylvania Reliable Energy and Sustainability Standard. I think I nailed that one. But anyways, House Bill 2277, if you are curious, that is the current number. We expect that legislation to be reintroduced. There are other solutions, of course, as to how we achieve 35% from renewable sources or more across the General Assembly. It is a conversation that has to continue, should continue. Penn Future Conservation Voters, we will be in the midst of that conversation as it continues next year. Look for more there. This is not a comprehensive list. I answered a question in the chat about electric vehicles. We have a lot of work to do there. So many things across conservation, clean water. All of these issues are extremely critical for Pennsylvania. We need to take the lead on a lot of these issues. We hope that the General Assembly and Governor Shapiro will do that as we head into 25-26 legislative session. I'm stopping there, but please feel free to reach out to us as always, either organization with any questions. We'll get back to you. We promise. Thank you so much for your support. We need you over these next 2 years.
All right, thank you, everyone. That was great. Yeah, so now we can move. We're running a little behind, so we might go a couple minutes over just for folks' awareness. But we'll move on to the Q&A section now. And just as an FYI, make sure you check the answer tab of the Q&A box because we've been answering some of those questions as they've been coming in. But first, I'll start with a question from Joe, who asked, he said, I'm meeting with my state senator tomorrow. What should be my #1 ask? I'll kick that over to Katie and/or Adam.
I think the #1 ask and one of the easiest asks before inauguration at the federal level is let's get a PETA bill done, a Pennsylvania Energy Development Authority bill done, because that utilizes federal IRA dollars, which we know we got to sign some contracts on and get off the finish line. So that's going to be my #1 recommendation. Adam, what's your #1 recommendation? Or maybe the same.
I'm going to go with peer pressure and say community solar. It's been around a long time. We've all been working on it, so I'd say community solar. It received a lot of attention in the chat from a number of sources. So, I don't think you can go wrong with either, but I'm going to say community solar.
Yeah.
And I just want to say thank you for taking the time to meet with your legislator. Thank you for asking that question. I absolutely love to hear that.
Awesome. Yeah. So the next question I'll kick over to Molly, and it's from Julie, who asks, how did you assess each tool and approach to reach voters?
Thank you so much for this question, and I'll address it just very briefly. There was another question from Charles, I think, also that we addressed in the chat about what of all the tactics we talked about is the most effective. And so the two things I'll say on this is one, first, after every election cycle, we do a big analysis of the voters we talked to and the voters that ended up going out and actually casting ballots. Of course, as a reminder, we can't see who anybody voted for, but we can see whether you voted. And so we're going to take our time and over the next few months, do a really deep analysis of whether our tactics worked. And if so, with which voters and try and figure out why. And so we assess many of these tactics by going directly to the source. If we knocked on your door, texted you, called you, and ran a digital ad to your address, did you come out and vote at the end of all of that? If you didn't, let's figure out why. Let's look at your demographics. Let's look at the larger voter trends and see if anything can explain kind of why our program did or did not connect with certain voters. And so that's a really big project that we're going to be working on the next few months as we learn more about which voters actually came out in this election. The other thing I will say is that these are proven, tried, tested, and effective. We are not sending a bunch of text messages for the fun of it. We're not knocking on your door because we like to get out and get some good exercise in the fall, although it is lovely. We are doing these things because they are proven tactics that work. There's a lot of research, a lot of people who do this work, who study these things, social scientists and academics who assess the effectiveness of these various tactics when they're done alone, when they're done together, when they're done to different populations of people during different elections, during different times of the year. And so like any discipline, winning elections is very heavily studied. And so as an organization that's very serious about doing this work, we spend a lot of time reading those studies and making sure that we are running our programs in a way that's consistent with the current best practices.
Amazing. Thank you, Molly. So the next question is going back to Adam and Katie. Are we positive that clean energy initiatives are safe?
Here's where all of you help us. We are big on accountability. We, with other partners, put together the Pennsylvania Environmental Scorecard. Penn Future has an amazing legal team that does excellent work to protect our issues in the courts as well. But we need all of you to help us to continue pushing this needle to make sure that that one vote majority or these two people over here don't get cold feet because they're worried about whatever else. So we really need, it's not just us, it is collectively, it is all of us who will need to make that impact. And that is where, you know, if you're here on this webinar, you're probably on our email lists, you know, pay attention to some of those advocacy emails from both of our organizations, et cetera, because we need your help to make sure that they stay safe.
And the only other thing I'll add there is I know there's been a lot of conversation about this. There's been a lot of articles that folks are reading about the Inflation Reduction Act, about what a second term for Trump means for the incredible progress that the Biden-Harris administration has made on fighting climate change. There's still a lot of unknowns, but the good news is that a wholesale rollback of that entire package of legislation is going to be a very hard thing to do. A lot of the pieces, this law has existed for over 2 years now. A lot of the pieces, as Katie and Adam described, are already moving and already being implemented. However, like Katie said, the single most important thing we can do to make it even harder for them to roll back pieces of this landmark legislation is to make it so incredibly popular and so well known and so important that there is a public outcry when they try and do this. And we saw this done with things like the Affordable Care Act. Despite efforts, it's still yet to be repealed, thankfully. And so I think that we need to start thinking about our work like that. How can we make these policies like the IRA, the bipartisan infrastructure law, so universally popular and beloved and known that it makes it that much harder to repeal pieces and to chip away at it. And I know that's a big job, but I think it's a really important job.
Amazing. Thanks, Zil. So Adam and Katie, again, what about House Bill 1542, which is the bill to help transition to deploying more electric school buses?
Certainly analogous to a big win from this legislative session, which was Solar for Schools becoming law. You know, as with most of these legislative items, if there's a bill that's involved, the only thing I can really suggest is keep paying attention to that particular issue. Bills will have to be reintroduced. There will be new numbers, and you know, for something like that, I can see us both organizations advocating for it. So certainly, you know, hope for good things to come.
Well, another question that you guys will definitely have the answer to: is there any hope for RGGI, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative? What's the status on that?
I'll just say that Penn Future is one of the organizations who's actively involved in the arguments before the Supreme Court in Pennsylvania. So there's still hope. You know, to the extent that that's all I'm going to go with. There's still hope. But I appreciate the question.
Yeah, and that's part of the importance, as I mentioned earlier, of that one vote majority in the state house, is because now we're not getting constitutional amendments banning us from ever participating in any kind of cap and invest program, which is something that they wanted to do before we had that one seat majority. So this is very important.
Perfect. Thanks, Zil. Well, I know we're a little short on time, so I'll ask the final two questions. So first, what can I do to stay involved going into the new legislative session? And what can folks on the call do?
I would actually love to throw that to Jess, our illustrious Director of Civic Engagement. Jess, I'm gonna call you off back onto camera here.
No, I'd be happy to. Well, the good news is, folks, that if you are here with us tonight, You are now a subscriber and supporter of both of these amazing organizations I have the honor of working with. And that means that you will get the important updates to your inbox. If you happen to live in one of the key regions where we currently have civic engagement member staff, you'll get the calls and the text to check in, see how you're doing, and how you're able to plug in and support the movement. So right now, actually, how can you stay updated? You've done it. You've signed up. You're with us. You're with our organizations. I do encourage you, if you have Gmail, take a look at the promotions folder. Maybe we might get stuck in there some days. And we will put in the follow-up email to all of you how to join our text list, because that is going to be the quickest way that you get those urgent needs where we need you to pick up a phone and call your senator or your representative. So really appreciate each of you for joining us, for caring about this and joining that movement. And I'm going to drop a couple of links in the chat box and in the follow-up email. If you want to do more and you want to go that extra mile, let us know and sign up for our volunteer form. And one of our civic engagement members will be in touch with you.
Great, thanks, Jess. And the last question. So putting 2024 behind us, what races are up in 2025 and 2026 that we can look forward to?
Some of you on this call don't know me. This is my favorite question to answer. In Pennsylvania, there are 2 elections every single year. So next year, we have school board races, township supervisor races, borough council races, that really hyper local level, where it's a lot easier for folks like you, maybe, to think about running, maybe on a pro-environment platform in your local community. But also, we have some counties have district attorney races. We have multiple counties that have county councils that alternate, and county executive races in some of those counties are also up this coming year. We also have state judges, Commonwealth and Superior Court, and of course the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. And we know that the Pennsylvania Supreme Court is important because of the Reggie fight, getting judges elected to that bench who believe in protecting Pennsylvania's Environmental Rights Amendment. So there's actually a lot of elections up next year, and then we go right back into a legislative election in 2026, along with Governor Shapiro, who will be up for re-election as well. And we have some work to do to push all of these folks to become better and better environmental champions, and push our issues. So that is what's coming up. And we're going to keep asking you to get out there and vote for everybody.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Katie. Well, I know we're a couple minutes over, so that should just about do it. I really want to thank everyone for attending tonight's webinar. I know there are still a lot of questions and unknowns, so if you want to stay up to date on our work, you can head to both of our websites, which will be linked in the chat. Here you can sign up for our email lists and for up-to-date information on anything pertaining to the environment in Pennsylvania. On CVPA's website specifically, you can see the full list of our endorsed candidates from this past election cycle. And you can also check out our 2023-2024 Pennsylvania Environmental Scorecard, which details how exactly your legislator voted on the environment this past legislative session. So again, thank you so much, everyone, for attending tonight. Like some of the speakers said, these results weren't what we had hoped for. So please take some time over the holiday season to rest and recharge, because on January 1st, the work begins. Thank you.